Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning company specialized in project management, production tracking, and the creation of media review platforms for the creative industry. ftrack has recently released 2 new versions of its media review software. Check out ftrack Review for the new interface and even more accessible reviews. You can also try cineSync 5, the brand new version of cineSync, built from the ground up for the most secure, high-quality review sessions out there. You can try both products for free via the link on the description below. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. You can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of VFX Notes. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and as always, I'm joined by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hey everyone, how you doing, Ian? How's it going?
I'm good, thank you. It's great to see you again, especially in the upside down, because I'm down under. Get it? Oh my gosh.
Oh my god.
Oh my gosh, it started.
Good.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, I should put like a little drum there. That was a good joke.
And a very good clue to what we're talking about today. Except before we get into this discussion about this amazing TV show, I'm going to mention our sponsors. Thank you so much to ftrack and Action VFX. We really appreciate the sponsorship. And to our Patreon supporters. Also a big part of the show, right, Hugo?
Yes, absolutely. Without the Patreon support and without the sponsors, the show would not exist. So thank you so much for that. And also, if you're a Patreon, you get to pick which of the guests, which of the hosts you like the most, and you can support either Ian or me on Patreon to get the episodes early. I also would like to just mention really briefly, if you're not a subscriber to Hugo's Desk, maybe consider subscribing. I just wanted to say that I'm trying to reach 100,000 subscribers so we can get the channel certified, get a bit more support from YouTube, and also get the plaque for the 100,000. That would be probably one of the first channels of compositing to have a plaque as well. So if you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to the channel as well, to Hugo's Desk.
Like and subscribe. That's what I say.
Push the button.
If you're listening to this on the audio podcast, I would also love you to rate this on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast network and subscribe. But thank you, everyone, for their support. We certainly do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Now on to Stranger Things. We are actually covering every season of Stranger Things here at VFX Notes. This is our look at season 1. Hugo, it feels like Stranger Things started 20 years ago, right? Is that about right on Netflix?
Well, I know exactly what you mean. It does feel like it's been going on forever, but in fact, it's really strange, I guess, that it's only from 2016, really. But yeah, we this episode is only going to be focusing on season 1. We will have more episodes about the rest of the seasons as well. We have a lot to say, so we had to split it because there's so much on this show. They've progressively become bigger and bigger with time. But yeah, I know what you mean. It's basically the biggest show of Netflix and probably one of the biggest shows of streaming ever, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, it does feel like it's Netflix flagship show, and I'm not clear on the watcher numbers and all that kind of thing in Netflix, but I mean, every season I really get into it. I'm just going to say, when this show started, I loved it. I thought it was very intriguing. I thought it had some really interesting ideas, an interesting look, great score. I had no idea who the Duffer Brothers were. I thought the casting was really great. It wasn't until maybe, I'm going to say, season 2, that I kind of realized that they were sometimes derivative. Meaning the Duffer Brothers were referencing a lot of things. That's a big thing in your eyes about this series, isn't it, Hugo?
It is, yeah, it is. I mean, I'll be honest, like, I'm like you as well. This show is super important. I like it, but I also don't like it. I don't mean to like disrespect anyone, but I like it, but I also think sometimes it goes a bit too far, and sometimes it annoys me a little bit. I feel like I understand that every creation in the world has a lot of influences. I understand that, and we are all part of a world of mixing pot of ideas. But this sometimes takes it a bit far. Like, there's so many influences on this film that sometimes when I'm watching, especially season 2, like you said, and even season 3, it is borderline ripoff. It's like borderline, almost like, okay, you just did the same thing just now of that film.
What's an example of that? I get you, and I've just said that as well. It feels derivative, but yeah. What's some like classic examples of that, Hugo?
There is a huge list of things that I have in front of me. I'm not going to go through the whole list.
Really?
No,
really?
Okay, I'll do it really, like, I'll do just a little quick one. So, first of all, there are so many things from Silent Hill on this show. I know most people on the audience probably don't know Silent Hill. It's a really famous video game from Konami from '99, and there's like 7 or 8 Silent Hill games. So the entire fog thing, the other side, the other world, it's all rip-off of Silent Hill. I'm sorry to say, it's all there. Even the little things floating in the air, that's from Silent Hill as well. That's a very famous video game, and anyone that has played that game knows exactly what I mean. I don't say it's a rip-off, it's an homage, I guess. That's what we say now these days. That's what the kids say. So you have Silent Hill, then you have Last of Us. I'm just talking about games now. The Last of Us from Naughty Dog, which has the spores. It has the face things. It has all those kind of like monsters that are very similar, and especially the vines on the walls, very similar to The Last of Us. So that's just the video game side of it. Then, of course, this show wouldn't exist without the influence of Stephen King's The Mist, where you have the big we're going to talk about that on the next episode, but the big villain on season 2 is pretty much the same as The Mist from that book and from that film as well. And then I can just carry on. You have, go for it. It's just so much.
Think we haven't got time to go through more. I totally get it. And of course, in some ways, it is the strength of the show.
Yes.
Because it makes people remember the awesome games that you mentioned, but also hark back to the 80s films.
Yeah.
Especially Spielbergian and those sorts of films. Like that they do love, and then they're putting it on a streaming show. It's kind of like a clever thing that, hey, why didn't anyone else do that yet?
I know.
So I'm going to say I kind of like it. I'm a bit dense, and it took me a while to realize that was what was going on. But of course, that's what they're doing.
No, it is, and I get it. It's so funny that they basically do homages to Steven Spielberg, but then they also do homages to films that have been homaged from Steven Spielberg. Like, you go as far in the rabbit hole as, we can talk about Goonies, we can talk about like Close Encounters, which has Close Encounters. There's shots on the TV show that are exactly a carbon copy of Close Encounters. But then also you have Super 8 stuff, which is already on itself an inspiration from those Spielberg films. So you have like inspiration on top of inspiration. I understand what you mean. Like, I feel like this show, that's the strength for sure. It taps on to that nostalgia thing, which is so fashionable right now. Like, especially, maybe it wasn't as much in 2016 when it first came out, but it is definitely now. And I think Stranger Things is probably one of the reasons why we have such a nostalgic moment now with the 80s and even the 90s. And I feel like that makes sense because most people that were kids on that time are now adults, and so of course they're in power positions, and of course they get nostalgic and they accept and greenlight projects because they also remember these things, and they are classics on their mind. But I don't know, like maybe that's because I'm Portuguese, maybe because my background is in art school. I've always been taught in art school. I've always been taught in school that you can't just copy things. You need to kind of like take inspiration and evolve and do something else. I feel like the Duffer Brothers, like they've done a lot of new stuff on this show, and there's a lot of really creative stuff, but there's also some stuff that is literally just a carbon copy version of what they are inspiring with, and I sometimes have a problem with that because I don't want entertainment to just now become a mishmash of copying of other things that happened before. I feel like that's the danger we have here, because like Stranger Things is so big that it might now create an entire type of projects that are just like literally rehashings of everything. Yeah. I like creative, original ideas, and I'm sure people on the audience are going to tell me that there's no such thing as an original idea, but I still think there is. I still think there is places for original things with nods to the past. Just recently, I saw something like that. Everything, Everywhere at Once is like that. It's highly creative, takes a lot of inspiration from a lot of sources, but it doesn't copy any of them. So I feel like that's my thing with Stranger Things. I like it, I love it, but also sometimes hate it. I have a love-hate relationship with it.
Okay. Here's another angle on it slightly differently, and we will get to the visual effects of this season 1. I actually think one of the things I remember really clearly watching this in 2016 on Netflix, on a good TV, or on my computer sometimes, was how vivid it was, even though it has that 80s look. Now, this is something about the show that's progressed as well into season 4, which is where we're at now. In using HD cameras, high resolution Netflix, streaming stuff. Wow, that's a really non-technical way of saying it. But I feel like it really brought home a lot of that great imagery to people, and it was like one of the first shows that really demoed the 4K thing that Netflix was doing, and and a lot of that has to do with camera choices and cinematography and sort of the style of the show, right, Hugo?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is a lot of cinematographers on this show, but the main cinematographer of season 1 was Tim Ives. We also have a few episodes from Top Campbell. Everything else is like, there is 5 main DOPs on the show on the entire 4 seasons, but Tim Ives was very involved on season 1, and especially establishing the look of it. And this comes now, it's something that everyone knows, but back then in 2016 this is very new. 2016, I know it sounds very not that long ago, but it was long ago for 4K.
In streaming world, it's a lifetime ago.
It is, exactly. Like, and Netflix has always been in the cusp of everything. They've one of the first ones to adopt ACEs, one of the first ones to adopt linear workflows, the first ones to adopt 4K HDR. If you go to their website, there's a ton of really cool documentation about HDR pipelines. And in fact, I'll tell you one thing, because I've done that, you can go to Netflix website and find all this documentation of their pipelines and actually build a pipeline upon that. So that's the cool thing about it. Like, they are very open with how they are doing the show, because they want all the shows to be future-proof. So everything is supposed to be delivered in 4K, done in 4K, filmed in 4K. They have a very strict selection of cameras that they approve, that have to have that kind of resolution first, native resolution. This season was filmed with Red Epic Dragon. Then we have the Red Alien and the Red Monster on the other seasons. But this specific season was Red Epic Dragon, shot, I would assume, in 6K. To be released in 4K. And then, of course, the lenses were the Leica lenses, the Suma Lux C series lenses. And so the film has, they captured in 6K at 194:1 aspect ratio, very, very much like a Steven Spielberg movie, very, very punched. Like the color and the grading is very colorful. It really gives you a sense of the 80s and the sense of how it was back then. I feel like in that sense, the film is a complete achievement. The TV show, sorry. I keep saying film because we're so used to...
I'm going to say because you keep saying film, that's the whole point. No, but that's exactly... Like, that's it, Hugo. It's a series, but it has a filmic look. And of course, so many streaming series now, that's the aim of the creators, to have a very filmic feel. But I definitely remember in 2016 feeling that about Stranger Things.
Absolutely.
Compared to other things out there. Now, look, Game of Thrones had a filmic feel, because it was epic but it's whatnot.
Different. I think it's different. It's different because that's like an epic Lord of the Rings type of thing.
Fantasy thing.
Yeah, you're expecting it to look filmic, because if it looked that much, like if it looked very bar bones, it would have been weird. But this is a show about a bunch of kids, it's like Goonies. Goonies on acid, Goonies on acid / The Thing / John Carpenter / 10,000 films that they reference, but and Stand With Me and Stand By Me, like all those films, but it looks like those films. And I've always watched this show in 4K on my projector, and I don't mean any disrespect, but I think this show looks better than most films that I've watched. I'm sorry, it does, because the resolution, the quality, I really have to put my hat out to Netflix. I think their insistence in 4K and HDR paid off. And when you look at Mindhunter, when you look at Stranger Things, when you see all the films and also the shows that Netflix has outputted, it doesn't have a TV look at all. They are all very, very filmic and a lot of polish as well. Obviously, Stranger Things gets exponentially better with season 2, 3, and 4 in terms of visual effects, quality, editing, cinematography, and everything. Because you can kind of feel this was the first one, and I don't think they were aware of the big of how famous they're gonna be. So you can kind of see that it was a relatively low budget show. They didn't have a lot of means, you can tell, but I think they took a lot out of it. What they had, they really used, and it shows on the camera. They probably put all the money on the framing, and it shows. Because the show is very polished.
Yes, I'm glad we could mention that because it's a big takeaway from the first season, and of course it's continued in the others.
So one last thing I wanted to mention is that the most of season 1 is directed by the Duffer Brothers, but there are 2 episodes by someone we have already done a show on, which is Shawn Levy, which we recently did an episode about Free Guy. And he's also very involved on this show from season 1. And he actually directs episode 3 and 4, which is really cool as well. Just wanted to mention that.
I think they brought it to him, didn't they?
Yeah.
He's the effectively made it happen, this show.
Yeah.
And he, as we've talked about, he's very familiar with visual effects.
Yeah.
He's really good at explaining how things are done. I love the featurettes that he's involved with throughout the series, but also in other films. So yes, I think Shawn Levy is a big part of why this show works.
And one shout out to Shawn Levy, because he is one of the directors out there always thinking visual effects and always shouting out all the companies and everyone involved. He's really into it, and it's so good for the industry that we have directors that do that, because sometimes they kind of either not say shit on VFX, but either dismiss VFX or don't want to talk about it. Shawn Levy has always been very open, and he's always on all the featurettes. He's always name dropping all the companies. It's really cool to see, and I wish more directors were like him.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's pivot to the visual effects. One takeaway from season 1 compared to 2, 3, and 4 is that it feels like the Duffer Brothers weren't ready for the visual effects of Stranger Things. Now, I mean that in a good way. It sounds like they were really keen to do a lot of things practically, so that's one thing. It sounds like they didn't necessarily have the budget to do huge visual effects. They didn't really approach season 1 with like a core visual effects studio, as they seem to have done with the others, although lots of studios have contributed. What it means is there's great visual effects in season 1, but it doesn't have the same huge impact that 2, 3, and 4 have, does it, Hugo?
No, I know exactly what you mean. This is so much small. I didn't mean to disrespect anyone, but it's so much smaller when you look at season 3, for example, which is literally a high-end Hollywood movie, and then you see this season. This is almost like one of these low-tier, low-budget, not saying the VFX look bad, but it's almost like a low-tier, low-budget independent movie almost, because you only have a few shots, only a few moments. But here's the thing, hear me out. I love that. I actually think season 1 is super controlled and super, it's much more organic. It reminds me a bit of the first Matrix, where you only have some effects, but when they happen, they are amazing. And so I think, in a way, the show is amazing anyway in season 2, 3, and 4, but it has lost that little magic moments that season 1 provides. And I think it has to do with the fact that this is the first ever time that we see the upside world, the upside down, sometimes the first time we see the Demogorgon, the lab. This is the first moment that we are presented and introduced to this universe. And obviously, it's not the same when you see it again, even with more polish, because it doesn't matter that it's not as polished as the other seasons. It's the first time we ever see these moments. They become mythical. They become like legendary because they are the first time you watch them. So I think in that sense, I'm sure I'm going to get hate from that, but I think season 1 is probably the best season so far because it's so controlled, well edited, not too long, doesn't have too much exposition, doesn't have, it's very tight. Feels to me like they were worried not to be renewed, and so they really did something very tight,
Well, yes. You often hear from filmmakers when they're not given all the budget in the world, they come up with great solutions and, only use things like visual effects sparingly, and sometimes that actually is for the benefit of the project. Here, especially in relation to the Demogorgon, Hugo, they really did try the practical thing and use it, i.e. man in suit, but then also, use CG where it was obviously necessary for the Demogorgon to do attacks and come through walls and things like that. But I actually really do love the practical stuff here that I'd almost forgotten about, to be honest.
Yeah, there's quite a few times where you have a man on suit. I'll put the footage on while we're doing the podcast. It's so funny to see the person on the man on suit. It really works though. I'm shocked. I didn't until I researched for this episode. I had no idea that they had I found at least 2 shots where we have a full man on suit with some augmentation, of course. It's mostly when we have the Demogorgon really close to camera and you have a person inside the suit and you see his face inside the mouth. It's so funny. It even has blood and everything. It's so hilarious. Yeah. And that's also when Barb, no mean to spoil everyone, but when Barb dies on season 1, you also see a man on suit on the pool, inside the pool when she's dying. So it's really cool.
With the Demogorgon, we really have to mention the role here of Aaron Sims and his company in both designing what would be the final look for the Demogorgon in that series and also delivering CG visual effects shots. I mean, Aaron Sims is and his company is behind some of the great monsters in recent times. And at that point in their lives, they were doing a lot of visual effects shots for shows and films as well. And it's really interesting to see some of the tests that they had to do for this show, and then some of the execution. I actually remember trying to cover some of this work for different publications back in 2016 or 17, and they were actually keeping the Demogorgon quite secret.
Yeah.
You know, it was a bit of a reveal to show the behind the scenes a lot at that stage. So there wasn't actually a lot of coverage right back in 2016, 17 of the Demogorgon. But when it came out and when, you know, this show was nominated for a VES award, there was a bit more revealed about how it was done.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, they were amazing. There's quite a few things now, like, and I'm going to play them while we are doing the podcast here. Yeah. But it is also an amazing design. Like you said, they're really famous for doing a lot of design work on a lot of films. Planet of the Apes, Independence Day 2, Turtles, like so many films in the history of Hollywood. But the design is really cool. This is one single monster. I know in season 2, 3, and 4 we have like 10, 20, 50 monsters on the show. But this is one singular monster, really well constructed, very well integrated into the scenes. You have a lot of really cool moments, especially when the Demogorgon falls from the ceiling, when it lands in the house, and also like that Freddy Krueger moment, you know, when he's stretching. Another film that they literally copied, but the stretching thing coming out of the wall, and then he kind of comes out of the wall. All those shots are really cool, intense, and I mean, I know for today's standards, the Demogorgon doesn't look as photoreal as it does now on season 3 and 4, but back in 2016, I think this was an achievement because it looked stunning back then. You know,
I remember in the 90s when CG was getting bigger and bigger, and filmmakers wanted creatures like this in their films, and maybe it was a bit of a mixture of man in suit versus CG. I remember one of the techniques to really make sure your CG creature still looked okay was and the phrase was to hide it in shadow and hide it in light, you know, they would say. I think that was the phrase. This is what happens here. Of course, it's called Stranger Things. It's a horror themey type thing. It's in the dark mostly. And so I feel like they get away with it a bit because it tends to be in the dark, hidden in shadow. And, you know, in the subsequent series, we see a lot more still sometimes in the dark, but, you know, lit differently. And, of course, maybe things have moved on in the couple of years since. But they do it very effectively in series 1 to hide it in shadow.
They do it, and in fact we only really see it in full light at the end on the last episodes when Elle is fighting them on the school. But even on the school, even when they shows up on the school on the corridors, and then also on the confrontation with Elle when you have all that simulation and particle system, even there we have a lot of flickering from lights and bulbs. And so, well, that of course adds to the complexity of how to light this in CG, because you have to have the HDRs from the set, but then you also have to have references of how the HDRs behave with all those light flickers. A lot of times this is done by photographing physical HDR spheres in the real camera to have reference of what the light bounce looked like. But I think the flashes helped as well, because you never really see them in full light all the time. You just see the flashes, and so you kind of get glimpse of him. The only, I think,
and real it's scarier.
It's
it is scarier that way, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And it really like makes it really strong, that sequence, because then you have Elle. Elle is just like reaching the first phase of her powers. She's not very powerful yet, so she's just fighting one Demogorgon. I mean, in season 2, she's like doing a portal and stuff, but she's so much less powerful, and she just disintegrates him in front of her. You know, it's like you said, it's the simplicity of these shots that make it so cool and so legendary. I think this show really opened the door to all the other seasons, of course, but also other shows as well.
You could say opened a gate, I suppose, Hugo, couldn't you? You could say that.
Oh my God.
I'm sorry.
This entire, I mean, I know we're not going to talk about everything, but this entire project was, there were, as I understood, there's 4 main companies involved. You have Causa VFX, you have Aaron Sims Creative, Gradient Effects, which in Imaginary Forces as well. Gradient Effects actually did a really cool breakdown, 8 minutes long breakdown with all the shots they've done, a lot of invisible work that they've done. Obviously, one thing we must mention is that this show relies heavily on set design as well, like the other seasons do as well. We'll talk more about that in season 2 because I think it's more relevant. But there's a lot of set construction. There's a lot of parts of the hives and the wall stuff that is scattered through the wall on the labs, which is real, but then augmented in CG and with a lot of green screen. They did a lot of really good work there, both for the floating spores, for example, flying around on the air, on the lab, and all the other shots, which are CG particles. Of course, you have the augmentation shots for the openings on the walls from the lab, and also, of course, the pool where Barbas dies as well. So there's a lot of invisible stuff happening on this show. Even little stuff like the flies when you have the dead body on the diner when they find the guy that was supposedly suicide, but he was killed by the agent. Like you see some flies floating around. You have some snow augmentation on the Will's house as well. We have, of course, the full CG lab. The lab most shots on this show is full CG above the trees and also like behind the trees. So there is a lot more visual effects than probably people realize on this show. But I think these companies did an amazing job because it's not easy in 2016 to do this with probably a relatively limited budget and probably a quite strict deadline as well, because TV shows at this time were not as big as they are now.
No, I think in particular Aaron Sims Creative and Gradient did such a great job, and shout out to Olkan Tan at Gradient, really cool guy, did some amazing work for Mill Film back in the day. On some great films. Hugo, I want to make sure people realize this is just season 1 we're talking about.
Yes.
So we're also going to be releasing episodes on season 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
So please come back to VFX Notes for those episodes. But I think, it's been fun just diving into mainly just the Demogorgon here. But I'm glad you mentioned the wide variety of other effects.
Yeah, I just wanted to like shout out because they look cool as well. I know it's simple things if you look at season 2, 3, and 4, it's simple stuff, but nothing was simple, I think, in 2016 at this time when TV shows were not as big as they are now.
Yeah.
So
Yes, I think you'll find in the VFX Notes coverage, it's contained here, and each episode is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because that reflects the quality of and amount of visual effects work in the show. Cool. But yeah, awesome. Again, shout out to our sponsors, our Patreon supporters, and our YouTube and podcast subscribers. Please like and subscribe. Hugo, thank you so much for chatting about Stranger Things 1.
No problem. Thank you. And thanks everyone for watching.
Bye, guys.